Without further ado, I will now hand over to Renate for the opening keynote speech. Thank you so much, Renate. And you've got air conditioning here by the podium, so that's a good spot, actually.
Thank you very much, dear Philippe. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to be the opening kind of speaker at such an event, celebrating 40 years of such an important movement like Cullen International. Quite a brand in the European kind of, think tank and kind of advisory world. And indeed, it's important, as Philippe said, the context in which kind of Cullen International was born. A context where Europe really kind of moved into a decisive next phase with the single market, with Jacques Delors, with a vision where Europe should be in the world. And I think we are exactly at such a moment right now, because everything around us is changing dramatically, and we have to place ourselves with who we are, the values we represent, but also the assets we have in that changing world. And I think that's what you're seeing when you're looking behind the building, what you're seeing when you're looking into the e-bubble, and what you're kind of following when you have European councils and other important developments in the parliament or wherever you are. What does this mean for us? It doesn't mean that we give up our values. It doesn't mean that we give up regulation, but it's no longer just about the Brussels effect. I know Anu Bradford well. I liked her book a lot. I did data protection in the past, and I was very proud of selling our GDPR around the world and inspiring others to kind of follow our principles of data protection when, sovereign countries were considering modernizing their privacy regime. But I don't think that's good enough at the moment when you're traveling the world as an EU official representing the EU to come with the Brussels effect. I think we have to tell a better story of who we are. And that's the story of innovation and regulation. This is what the current kind of, development is about. It's about Europe kind of looking at its assets, looking at its capacity, the rich research community, the rich talent, the finance that we have in Europe, that only was kind of invested in Europe, the entrepreneurship, the creativity that we have, the industrial base that we still have, make that work for the digital revolution that we live in, because that's the second phenomenon. I don't think we have seen as disruptive a technological phase as the one we're living in right now. The effect that AI will have on every sector in economy, every sector in society will be enormous. And we are only at the beginning of it. With agentic AI, we will have a totally different way of working, of communicating, of kind of building. And the jury is still out there, what role Europe can play in this. And that's why it's so important that this commission is also about rolling up our sleeves and showing the possibilities that Europe has to become an AI continent, to apply AI in our industrial sector so that we can make the leap ahead in mobility, in energy, in agriculture, in health, you name it, even in defense, because that's one of the new themes, obviously, that we have to take into account. And that matters because we are in a tech race geopolitically. Today's kind of, challenges, today's wars are not anymore the classical wars. They are cyber wars, they are kind of tech sovereignty wars. And that's why it's important that Europe, whilst remaining open to the world, whilst remaining a partner to work with allies, is also very sure about, building its own capacity and increasing the choice for European operators to play their role, to take their role into their hands, whether that's in telcos, whether that's in the health sector, whether that's in the mobility area. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that. But it's important to govern that and to frame that with political initiatives like the one that we have just rolled out in the beginning of June, which was the tech sovereignty package. Quite a statement where Europe wants to be in two areas where we are really lagging behind: cloud infrastructure, chips production. Both are hugely important when you look at the tech stack of the future to really be a strong player in innovation. And we are having a 70% dependency in the cloud sector. We are at the moment around 10% when it comes to, chips production. That's not where Europe should be. And that doesn't mean that we should kind of close the door for important kind of partners from other countries to kind of make their business cases here. No, but it should mean that we build on strategic public procurement, that we offer possibilities for EU partners to come together and to play their role. That's why I'm so proud that in the Commission, actually, we could pioneer on that. And we made a public procurement, and we actually kind of gave the call to 5, European players. So we will change our services to kind of European cloud providers, something that would have been unthinkable a couple of years ago. And nevertheless, that's an important development and important as a signal to the world. We're not closing, but we are kind of, in the business for win-win partnerships where we kind of both sides have to learn from each other. But we come not only with the Brussels effect, we come with a tech business offer. That's behind our, for instance, also international strategy on digital policy. And that's why we are with the executive vice president out there to kind of build digital partnerships. That's why we were 2 weeks ago in Brazil to kind of lift our digital dialogue to a digital partnership, which is our 5th one after Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Singapore. And that's an important development where we can kind of, build alliances around the globe to really advance together on digital transformation. And that doesn't mean that we are closing the eyes to our regulatory framework. Because for me, sovereignty has 2 legs. There's tech sovereignty, but there's also regulatory sovereignty. And we have seen a time where some of our digital rulebook assets, in particular the Digital Services Act and the Digital Market Act, were kind of challenged by partners because they were discussed as censorship tools, as discriminatory tools, something that we should stop applying. And of course, that is out of question. They are the result of our value system. They are the result of our democratic processes. They are the result of our discussions with the interinstitutional partners. And they are balanced, and they are not against somebody. They are to protect ourselves. They are internal market rules. They are following the Jacques Delors philosophy that we are a very interesting internal market. That's our biggest asset. But we want certain rules to be played in that market. And whoever comes on that market, wherever they come from, whether from Asia, from America, wherever they come from, they have to play by the rules. And that's what this is really about. So you have a fantastic menu today. You will talk about the future first-class connectivity that I will not talk about today because I talk about it too much. You will discuss, where the kind of the media sector is going to be. And we're working at the moment on the revision of the Audiovisual Services Directive, an important piece. And one of the issues to discuss there is, where does prominence in the future lead us? How should we in this online environment find, reliable information? How do we preserve the integrity of the information space if everything is changing here? And of course, around that, well, for sure, when you're looking at digital infrastructure and the tech stack, you will definitely also talk about a tech sovereignty kind of package. But I thought, also leading to the first panel that I will have the pleasure of being with friends on, that I should kind of, talk a little bit about our digital rulebook, about the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, because of the criticism that we have survived over the last year. And I think we've gone over that. And also because I'm so proud to kind of tell the story where we are on these important laws, only 2.5 years since they kind of, entered into full application. So let me start with the Digital Services Act. What is this really about? This is about, having a level playing field to bring platforms. And they are, of course, serving an important purpose for all of us in the digital world to flourish, to communicate, to buy, to be connected. But, of course, there has to be a level of accountability. With all due respect to the e-commerce directive and the exempted liability, there are certain things that have to be taken into account. And the Digital Services Act brings these kind of, due diligence obligations to the surface in a risk-based approach, taking into account the size of the platform, the elements of the platform, what systemic risks the platform poses to society. The other important principle of the DSA is, of course, transparency, to shed light on what is happening here. Why am I being profiled? Why am I getting a certain ad? Why I'm being recommended a certain content? And how can I kind of go about that if I don't want that? So that's an important part of, the mix of user empowerment and transparency for the platforms to be much clearer about what they do, but of course also for the individuals to be much clearer on, how they can kind of complain about that. Let me underline that the DSA is, of course, committed to the freedom of speech. This is who we are. The Digital Services Act is not at all a content law. It is totally agnostic about the content we're dealing with. It has a principle that what is illegal offline has to be illegal online. But that is not prescribed by DG Connect or the European Commission. That is on the basis of the criminal law statutes of the member states. So in Germany, something might be in a criminal code that is not in Sweden in a criminal code or vice versa. So that's one principle. But for the rest, it's not the content that is for us interesting. It's kind of the effect of how content is kind of, brought to a customer, what effect it will have, how you can maybe kind of, have other pieces of content to have a civic discourse that is broad and that it kind of, allows for a parliamentary debate to be fruitful, these kind of things. And of course, all that has to be seen also in the context of the rest of our regulatory key. And I'm sure you will be discussing that a lot. Sorry. With the European Media Freedom Act, with the Audiovisual Services Directive, all these things that are so important when it comes to our freedom of speech. We also have, next to the DSA, the DMA. The DMA, the Digital Markets Act, is not a competition tool. It's a pre-competition approach. It is an ex-ante approach to actually take into account that we have, with the great role that also gatekeepers have, gatekeepers such as Google or Apple, and they have provided us wonderful service and high quality kind of service, but they have built off sort of locked-in structures, which are, of course, an impediment to innovation. And here it's about kind of helping that this innovation is opened up so that we can have a plurality of services in the European Union that we really need to make this work in the long run. And also on that, of course, we are making kind of progress. So these rules are also innovative because they bring in some new elements. The DSA, for instance, has built in a co-regulatory system. We didn't start from scratch. Before the DSA, we already dealt with the platforms in different ways, in self-regulatory ways. We had a code of conduct on illegal hate speech. We had a code of practice on disinformation. The one was born when we had the radicalization online after the terrorist attacks, and we had to really react. The other was born after the big scandal of Cambridge Analytica, and we were very worried what might happen to the European Parliament elections in 2019. We didn't leave these codes aside. We actually have in the DSA a system that we can include these code of practices, these code of conducts into the DSA system in a sort of a co-regulatory system that allows us to also be more agile. For instance, the code of conduct on illegal hate speech has a clear obligation that within 24 hours, you have to kind of get out that illegal hate speech. It's illegal. It's illegal according to the national member states. That's not a rule in the DSA. The DSA speaks about expeditiously, so we can go further. So this is a very important aspect that we kind of, have built in. So where are we after 2.5 years of DSA enforcement? I dare say we can be very proud of what we have achieved because we already have seen a positive impact of what the platforms have built. On protection of minors, an issue that we will be debating later, we have now disable addiction creating features and better protection against strangers approaching minors built in by design. You have to choose it, but it's built in by design in the features of some platforms. It wouldn't have happened without a DSA. When it comes to user choice, large platforms have processes now to report illegal content, to address the recommender systems, to challenge content moderation decisions. Nothing of that would have happened without the DSA. Online marketplaces. Consumers are benefiting directly from stronger protections against illegal and harmful goods and some greater transparency when they receive information also about the recommender system. But of course, that's not yet good enough. And that's why we have to show that we are actually enforcing the law. Because it's good to have regulation, but only if it's enforced properly. And I think some of our pieces that we are exporting around the world, we have not done the best job in enforcing them properly. And the GDPR is one example of those. We have to get better. And I think with the DSA and the DMA, we're showing that we are getting better. And this is also because we have learned from the governance structures, an important issue that you should also discuss today. What is the right governance structure when you have a regulatory environment? And here, I think since the Delors days, and also following Draghi and Letta and everything that we have seen, from thinkers like those, I had looked at what is the state of the single market. They have clearly seen that, we need a bigger push for a single market enforcement also. That doesn't mean a power grab for the European Commission. That means an intelligent way of working together at the European level and the national level. And I think that's exactly what we have created in a pioneering phase with the DSA. Because we're not doing this alone in DG Connect. I luckily have people like Jeremy and Commissioner Merman and many of the digital service coordinators in member states who are with us in the Team DSA Europe. And we are working hand in hand. We can even do joint investigations. We meet regularly. We agree on priorities to kind of put our enforcement focus on. We are gathering evidence together, and we are kind of in this together. This is very different from having a totally decentralized kind of enforcement structure that we know from many other regulatory pieces, where this kind of, DNA reflex of the single market is simply not as kind of, realized as in the DSA context. So what that has led to? It has led us to many enforcement actions against many of the kind of, services, whether it's Meta, Instagram, X, TikTok, AliExpress, Temu, Shein, Snapchat, to name just a few. We have already 2 non-compliance decisions with fines, one against kind of X, one against Temu. That after 2 years to have gone through the entire process from starting an enforcement, preliminary findings with the right of defense, because we are following a due process and a rule of law approach to come to a non-compliance decision is not nothing. We have really also commitments, because this is not a fining machine. The DSA is not about imposing fines. It's about changing business models. And if, like in the case of AliExpress or TikTok, they have made commitments to actually change their behavior, that's fine for us too. And we will always try to also engage in dialogue with them. Let me talk a little bit about the DMA enforcement, because I'm taking too much time already. Also there, the DMA has helped us to make choices. We did not have alternative app stores before. They would not exist without the DMA. We would not have the possibility to kind of choose between the search engines and browsers on the, operating systems and on our iPhones. This is very clear that this is a trend that is more and more offering opportunities. We have an innovation system where companies are using better the data that they can have. We are seeing innovative startups and scale-ups. We have kind of partners such as Fabric or DataPods, and they are developing interesting new solutions. Nothing of that would have happened with the DMA. But of course, we are also trying to build, in regulatory dialogue, the right approach with the gatekeepers to kind of move them in the right direction, like for Apple, for the operating system interoperability, when they kind of, looked at the iPhones and the smartwatches, the carbots and the speakers. So here we really, through specification, brought them in the right mindset. And of course, we also are clear when we are having issues with what they have done. For instance, with the kind of, business model of Apple, we have fined them because we are not convinced yet that what they have done on the Apple App Store is enough. We also kind of fined Meta because of their consent and pay model, because it was not good enough for us. And by doing that, we also pushed them forward. And we are in discussions with Google for their App Store terms and their Google search terms, because also that is not yet where we are. We are not doing this in isolation, as I said. We are in for partnerships. That's why I'm so happy that, first of all, in our neighborhood, talking about Ofcom, also here and with us in the next panel, it's great that we have partnerships with them on the DSA, but also, for instance, with somebody like Julie, the e-safety commissioner in Australia. But we also just have been to Brazil to kind of sign an administrative arrangement with the data protection authority there, because they have a minor protection law that is very similar to our DSA. And we have a memorandum of understanding with Japan. And we have seen that the international convergence on these important online harms is also developing. I'm so proud that the last G7 digital ministers meeting under the leadership of France has actually agreed on 7 principles for minor protection online, something that I would not have dreamed of a year ago. And it was possible. It was because of the leadership of France, but it was also because there is a societal debate wherever you are in the world about how we can better protect the next generation from the online harm of the online reality. Let me finish with a point on simplification. As much as I'm a defender of our regulatory sovereignty, I think it's equally important to really be honest to ourselves and to take a critical look at our regulatory landscape and to kind of be open about the lack of coherence, the duplication, the red tape that we have created, sometimes because it's the famous last night of the last trilogue, taking very long and just adding and fudging our compromises, and then we add additional red tape that is really a nuisance. We should no longer do that. And that's why this omnibus exercise, where we are really taking a critical look and we're saying, hey, wait a minute, there's a lack of coherence. Let's address this in a rapid way. Let's address this in a targeted way is so important. I'm very proud that we have done the AI omnibus because it was highly needed, because there was a lack of clarity what would happen to high-risk applications as of the 2nd of August, because we don't have the standards ready. And I'm also very happy about how we are advancing on the digital omnibus, because that's on data really important, because we can have the best AI innovation if we don't fuel with the data. It will not work. And that's why we have to create a data market where we are not kind of throwing out the principles of the GDPR, but we are bringing out a bit more forcefully the innovation-friendly aspects of the GDPR, and this is what this is really about. So in closing, I would kind of like to say that I am very proud of the regulatory choices we make, regulatory choices that kind of, bring about more innovation, that protect users better, that are very recognizant of our values, but they're also modern and smart. I hope that you will today, when you have a lot of regulators in the room, and on the panels, you will also address the changing role of regulators. Because with the scarcity that we all have on our resources, all the regulators, and I know many of you in the room here in your various roles, all of you will have to take on new roles. From telco regulators, you also become media regulators, or from media regulators, you also become DSA regulators or data regulators. That will be the future. And that's why we have to kind of connect the dots in a different way. We have to look at the best governance and the best coherence systems also between regulators. And I think that's probably the next phase of the simplification agenda, to actually create governance structures that speak to each other instead of being in silos with each other. And that will be so important with the AI revolution, because we will have chatbots that fall under the Digital Services Act, under the AI Act at the same time. And now we're having a huge debate with mythos on AI and cybersecurity. And all of that will have to be brought together so that it becomes a coherent policy instead of having these silos that don't speak to each other. So have great discussions. Do this in the Cullen kind of, open-minded way. It's about knowing what we're talking about. And then the best solutions can be found. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Renate. Thank you.